What's up? This is Rebel Radio.
What up? What up? This is DJ Newmark.
This is Peanut Butter Wolf.
It's your boy. It's okay.
Keep checking out Rebel Radio.
Rebel Radio.
This is Rebel Radio.
We're in the place right here. Rebel Radio is going down.
Would you say Rebel Radio?
Oh, wait. Let's do it again.
Rebel Radio.
What's up, Rebels? Welcome to Rebel Radio, your weekly show about low expectations. When I say low expectations, I'm not talking about our guests. Our guests are amazing. I'm talking about me. Just don't expect too much and you might be happy. My guest today is Oliver Wang. He's a DJ, college professor, journalist, blogger, man of many words. And he's got a new book called Legions of Boom, Filipino mobile DJ crews in the Bay Area. And it's fascinating if you are into the scratch DJ scene at all. This is where it all started, going back into the 80s when a lot of these guys were just kids coming up and finding their way as DJ crews. Turns out Oliver and I met back in 1995. I was a judge at the DMC DJ Championships, and he was sitting in the same room. And we talk about some interesting stories from the book, about how some of those guys got started. And we also explore why the business side of music is not always bad. It tends to get a bad rap whenever we're talking about it. But I guess the reason we all know about hip hop is because somebody turned it into a business. So Oliver's going to tell us about that. All right. Welcome back to Rebel Radio. My guest today is Oliver Wang, college professor.
Yes.
Music journalist.
Yes.
Crate digger.
Yes.
Author, DJ, podcaster, blogger.
Yeah. I have a short attention span, I think, is the gist of it. Yeah.
Renaissance man, I like to say.
I was, as I was saying earlier to someone, it's we all are slash something, multiple slashes.
Yeah.
We are the slash generation. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
To do this.
It's good to see you.
So Oliver is the author of Legions of Boom.
Filipino American DJs, mobile DJ crews at the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah, this is so. I want to talk about this book. This book is fascinating.
I'm glad you like it.
I read it.
Or at least you think it's fascinating.
I read it last week, and I got to say, I mean, I love DJs, and I'm from the Bay Area, and I didn't expect to like this as much as I did. And so, I want to dig into some stuff from the book.
Yeah, please.
But why'd you write it?
I mean, there's the easy answer would be I am as you mentioned before, my day job is as a college professor, and as part of my obligations to the profession, I have to occasionally turn out, publications.
Sure.
And so this fulfills part of that. But I think the more personal explanation is, I got turned on to this story partially because in the mid-1990s, before I even started graduate school, I was a music writer, and I was writing about specifically hip-hop a lot. Including for Herb Magazine, which is how me and Josh first got to know each other way back when. And when I began talking to the turntablists who were in the Bay Area at the time, and so these are people who, world famous DJs like Q-Bert, Shortcut, Mixmaster Mike, Apollo, etc. The one common, link between all of their various origin stories, besides the fact that they're all Filipino American and from the Bay Area, which is notable enough, is they all got started in different mobile crews. And I'd already known a little bit about the scratch scene, but I had never heard anything about the mobile DJ scene. And the more that I dug into it, the more I realized here was this entire massive scene that, extended the duration of the 1980s, that involved hundreds of crews, thousands of young people across the Bay Area. And no one had really reported or written anything about it outside of maybe, I think Davey D was the only person I could find at the time. And as both a journalist and as a scholar, by the time I started thinking about pursuing this as a book length project, it would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. It just seemed like it was a good story to chase after. And so both as a dissertation, which is what this book originally began as, but really just as a way of telling a history that I think very few people outside of the scene had any awareness of. And I think that was the main thing that compelled me toward it, is this idea that a generation of high school teenagers created a party scene that they dominated and they ran for 10 plus years, that and I don't want to suggest that them giving birth to the turntablist scene is their most important legacy, because I think it kind of reduces the accomplishments of what the scene did in and of itself. But that's certainly also a linkage of how we understand the present day world of DJing, how it links back to sort of what was happening in the Bay Area of the 1980s.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that stood out to me, is that for as rich stories there were in the book, it probably wouldn't have happened if it were not for Q-Bert and Apollo.
Which part in terms of
like, this probably wouldn't be a book that has the kind of cultural relevance.
Yeah, I mean, I think to the extent that anyone is aware of there being sort of that being Filipino and being a DJ is a thing.
Yeah.
Certainly, it links back to the success that people like Q and Mike and Apollo and Short and Babu, and I mean, different Filipino DJs from across not just the U.S. and California, but really the world at this point. A lot of it links back to sort of Q, winning the DMC back in, what was it, 1990 or 91 at this point, and sort of putting the Bay Area and putting Filipino DJs on the map, and him becoming this massive inspiration to future generations. So I think certainly to the extent that people are interested in that wider story, it links back to him. But as I try to point out in the book, even he had gotten his start, and he was inspired by a previous generation of Filipino American DJs, folks in Spintronics, folks in Ultimate Creations. I mean, all these crews that people outside of the Bay have never heard of. But for a young Q-Bert attending Balboa High School in the early 1980s, like, those were the gods, from his childhood in essence. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So explain for us why there are so many Filipino DJs.
You have to read the book. No. I mean, partly, God, where to begin with that? I think part of it is, so in the Bay Area, right, you have this critical mass of Filipino-American family settlements that begins in the 1970s and throughout the 1980s. And so in cities like Daly City, it's the best known, but also places in San Jose, places in Union City, Fremont, up in Vallejo. You have, thousands, tens of thousands of Filipino-American families settling in these suburban places during the course of the 1970s. So their children come of age by the 1980s. And these are, schools and neighborhoods in which they are, if not the, literal demographic dominant group, they're sizable, right? And in the late 1970s, partly because of the explosion of interest in DJing, thanks to things like the, interest in disco, you have these young teenagers, they're in high school, they're sneaking up into San Francisco on weekends, sneaking into nightclubs up there like Studio West, and they're watching these discotheque DJs do their thing with what back then was called nonstop disco mixing, which these days we just take for granted as that's just how DJs DJ. It's every segue is seamless, right? But that was an innovation. That was something that had to be invented and popularized throughout the course of the 70s. And so by the time these kids come into contact with it in the late 80s, it really blows their mind, because it really puts the DJ into this position of power where they control the flow and the energy of the crowd throughout the course of the evening. And so what they take inspiration from is that experience in the nightclub, and their innovation lies in how can we translate that experience back to our suburban spaces. So in other words, how do we take what we see, the light show, the sound of Studio West, the mixing styles, how do we bring that back to, let's say, a Daly City or a Union City? And how do we duplicate it in someone's garage or in a school gymnasium or in a church hall? And that's how the mobile scene really takes off initially, is these kids wanting to create the same kind of nightclub experience, but back in their own neighborhoods, using whatever means possible they can figure out. And a lot of this is, this is way before DJ specialty stores and websites exist, obviously. So they're just DIYing everything. They're learning how to make their own lighting stands, and they're stealing sirens, lighting sirens off of, ambulances as a way to have a light show. They're creating their own fog machines. All as a way of showing them and their friends in high school how to have a good time, basically.
Right.
Yeah. So that's part of the story. The other part of it, how does the scene grow to the size it becomes? This goes back to those Filipino-American families, most of whom, and the ones whose kids become these DJs, they're middle class. That means they have the kind of, excess income to be able to loan out to their kids, to be able to buy the equipment, to buy records. And more importantly, these are, this is an immigrant community in which extended family networks are really important, in which community groups and church groups and student groups in colleges and high schools are really important to keep Filipino Americans connected to one another. So if you are a young crew and you need to get gigs because that's how you make your money, you plug into that existing network and you do your cousin's birthday party, or you do your aunt's wedding, or you do, your local high school's Filipino club's school dance. And it's the strength of that network which allows the scene to blossom, because it's able to circulate gigs to all of these new crews that start popping up out of the woodwork throughout the course of the 80s.
Yeah, one of the things you talk about in the book that I found interesting, I think about it a lot, but I'm not as smart as you, so
I'm not that smart, but okay.
Well, but I want to talk about that separately, because I think there's something really interesting to being an academic into hip hop. I know you're not just into hip hop, but you sort of come up out of that tradition, and and Jeff Chang, right?
Huge influence on me. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And on me as well.
Yeah.
Jeff, I think I worked for Jeff for about 3 days at Herb in the first. So my first day at Herb as an associate editor after I graduated was Jason Bentley's last day.
Okay. I didn't even realize Bentley was at Herb. Okay, so see.
Yeah, he was there. He was some kind of editor position. He was literally just leaving, maybe to go to KCRW full time, or I'm not sure. And then, or Kwango, I lost some of the history there. But and then Jeff was there, and he was leaving, and I actually filled his role, so he trained me for like a week before I
didn't realize that, because Jeff is basically who brought me into Herb at the time to work with. Oh God, was it T-Love? It was T-Love, I think. Was editing the hip hop singles section. This would have been around 94, 95.
Yeah.
And so Jeff basically gave my contact to T-Love, and that's how I started at Herb. And I eventually took over T-Love's position, and when I was an editor there for however many years and through the early mid 2000s. So, yeah.
Well, all right, let's shift gears and talk about that, because that seems more interesting. But I wonder, so I have this feeling that journalism and music journalism is important to culture.
Okay.
Right? That there's an important...
Hopefully, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of crap journalism, just like there's a lot of crap music.
Sure.
But that, a strong critical voice to help guide a scene. You talk a lot about this sort of scene-based movement in the book. Right, that's an important voice, and when we guys of a certain age sort of remember when the magazine of record told you to buy this thing and not that, and check for this DJ and not that, and right, and I feel like that's missing today, and I feel like that consumers, fans, are sort of worse off for not having that.
I mean, I hear where you're coming from. And I think for me, whenever this question arises, I'm always a little bit hesitant to pass judgment, only because even as sort of these different scenes have changed, like I'm older too, and sort of my investment in trying to stay on top of everything 24/7 is very different now that I'm in my early 40s versus when I was in my early 20s, right? And so even though I do think, I mean, the agreement that I have with you here is that there is less of a filter between what music gets made and how listeners receive it, right? And it used to be that a magazine like an Herb or like a Source or whatever, they were that intermediary to help filter through, well, here's all the music that's out here, but here's what you really should be listening to, right? It was, I mean, I fucking hate this term. I hope it's okay that I'm swearing.
Yeah.
But, the word curation gets way overused and abused these days. But
absolutely.
If I'm just going to invoke it just to say that part of what journalism and criticism can function as is sort of this curatorial impulse, which is we're going to take the 1,000 different things that you could be listening to and recommend 10 out of that. And I do think that what's shifted is that it's not necessarily that curation element's disappeared. It's rather there's like a 10,000 curators now, and they all have their own listicles of things that you should be listening to. I don't know whether the consumer whether the listener is worse off for it, it's sort of hard to say, because I think the other difference now is that if I wanted to know what the new whatever album sounded like back in the day, I sort of needed a magazine to first listen to it for me, because they would get the advance and they had a chance to listen to it. These days, I can just go to Spotify. I can go to YouTube.
Yeah.
So I don't really need the intermediary to have access, because that access has been already advanced to me, without requiring sort of someone in between to sit there. So that I can make the judgment for myself. So if, whoever the new, if we're talking, let's say, some new Flying Lotus album, chances are that's going to be streaming in full a week before its quote-unquote release date, because release dates are kind of meaningless these days anyways. And I don't know if the listener is worse off for having that direct access to it without requiring someone like me as the critic to basically sit between the two of us and say, well, yeah, you should listen to it. I still love writing criticism. I still feel like there's a function to it, which is that filtering aspect. But again, I don't know if as a whole a listener is worse off because we don't have that same kind of power that we had, let's say, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I tend to believe that too much choice is not good. That some choice is good, but too much can be sort of debilitating, and that music, like many things, is subjective. So what's good to me may not be good to you, and so I think, I don't know that we as a general, that people in general are that good at sort of knowing what they like. And so the radio has its system for getting people to decide what they like, which is play it over and over and over until you like it. And I think part of the music industry's system used to be that we go through this layer of media, right? So part of what you're talking about is we got the records early as journalists because someone wanted us to get them early, right? And so I think the fact that everything just shows up on Spotify at once sort of speaks to the diminished role of the critic in that, because there's no label saying, no, I need the critics to hear it first and talk about it. And
what about the blogs? Like Hypem and those guys are putting what's trending. And so I source my music that way.
So what they lack is a critical voice, right? So,
but this is you're saying it lacks a critical voice, but the mass people are saying that they like that song, so it rises to the top. So it's almost like you can't argue that then, because people like it.
So what happens is that when a new superstar artist, when Katy Perry makes a new single, there are millions of people who've already decided they like that before they even heard it, because they're Katy Perry fans and they want to hear it. And so it's going to be number one on Hypem every single time.
If they cover Katy Perry. Okay,
but or whatever, or when Diplo makes a track, it's going to be number one on Hypem always, because it's a Diplo track. Now, when The Source got the Public Enemy record, and I remember the Source review, they called it, instead of Fear of a Black Planet, they called it Fear of a Whack Album. Now, there's a lot of us who might disagree, but whatever. They caused an important dialogue within the community about this record, because they stepped up and said, it's not what we expected. Right? And so the millions of kids who are clicking thumbs up or thumbs down or whatever on Hypem or any of these platforms they're just not giving it that critical thought. Which I'm not saying is all bad, but I am saying that it's partly bad.
I think, let's see, a few thoughts here. One is that, on the one hand, I get where you're coming from, and I think part of me certainly agrees with the fact that we're sort of been thrust into this kind of brave new world. We're all trying to make sense of it. At least the old fogies like me, are still trying to make sense of it. And is there something lost? Yeah, probably, right? Probably something gained too. I don't mean to kind of equivocate about it, but I'm always trying to be self-aware of how in and out of touch I am within this. I do think it's interesting, and I think partly my other thought here is, as someone who, as a scholar, I'm interested in understanding phenomena regardless of my own personal feelings about it, and also raising someone. I have my daughter's now 10 years old, and the most powerful source in which she's learned about songs that she now loves and has learned to memorize was watching Pitch Perfect.
Oh yeah.
wow.
You know,
Yeah.
not in the theaters. It was I think we thought maybe you'd like this, and we watched it on, maybe it was on cable or something. But she has memorized basically every song off of that first soundtrack, or that was in the movie. So she knows how to do like the opening Dr. Dre rhymes to No, is it No Diggity? Right, to No Diggity, which it kind of blows my mind that her route into that is by watching the riff off in Pitch Perfect. So regardless of whether or not I think it would be more ideal for her to have heard it that way versus another way, for me, again, this is just me as a scholar and as an observer, I just find that really interesting. I don't know what to really make of it, but I think it's worth noting that these are increasingly the ways in which people learn about things. It's through movie soundtracks. It's through that, you know, the last song which television shows feel like they have to play during a montage of emotional moments for the key characters.
Sure.
But I mean, I hate to admit it, I've learned about new songs because of that. I've learned about new songs watching commercials. That's not the only way, but it is an increased way in which we're getting exposed to music. And again, regardless of my own personal take on it, I think it's sort of just an interesting way in which the distribution of how music flows to us has been changed and transformed over the years in a very quick amount of time. I mean, really, 20 years ago may sound like a long time ago, but to me, it doesn't feel that long ago at all.
Definitely.
And really, we're really talking about stuff that I think has flipped in really just 10 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, again, Josh, I totally hear what you're saying. Do I think there's been something lost in that transformation? Sure.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I don't want to be the one to judge how today's young people engage with music in a way where when I was young, their age, I didn't want to be judged about how I was learning about stuff either.
Of course.
You know, like one should never romanticize, I think, as you're pointing out, like finding stuff through the radio, because radio has always been corrupted as a medium to begin with.
Right.
So again, I don't want to be a moral relativist about it either. I guess the gist of what I'm trying to say is I don't know what to do with all this.
Well, what do you see as different? So you talk in the book about this concept of music being connected to identity, and I know a lot of that is racial and cultural, but some of that you could also say is generational, right? And so I wonder,
Yeah, sure.
how you know, when you see your students or your daughter, like, how do you think music plays into their identity differs from how it was for our generation?
I don't think it's very much different at all. I think that the way in which, I mean, the power of music, and this is something I think I mentioned in the book, is that, you know, it is both something that is both incredibly intimately personal, right? The songs that we think are our songs, we hold to us as dear as anything else in our lives. But it also, and this is what makes music so powerful, it's both intimate yet incredibly social, because it's how we define ourselves relative to one another. I identify with you because I like the same artists or the same songs that you do. I like the same genres as you do. That creates a community around itself. I don't think music's power to do that has changed much at all. I think, you know, for my students, for example, they're really into EDM. Now, that's not a music that I personally identify with very much. Maybe I just haven't given it a fair shake. I like stick drops as much as the next guy as a DJ, I guess. But I recognize that for them, attending something like the Electric Daisy Festival, which they do, that is part of their formation of how they have a sense of identity and of group identity, in the same way that me going to hip hop in the park in Oakland back in the mid 90s, that was sort of my gesture of sort of identifying who I saw as my community. I don't think music's ever lost that power. I think if there's a difference, it's that, you know, it used to, well, you know, we've gone from having, well, I don't know, a handful of major genres, right? You're a rock guy, you're a hip hop person, you are a jazz person, whatever. And now you have all these atomized micro genres where you can have subdivisions within subdivisions, and that becomes how you identify. So instead of having, you know, 4 or 5 major food groups, we now have, you know, 1,000 small ones.
Right.
And so the kind of community and group identity building happens at a smaller scale, perhaps, as a consequence. Maybe.
I saw one recently that was called French Israeli Pop. I was like,
See?
what the heck is that? But I love the song, and I was going to call it electro pop.
Sure.
Right.
There are a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's it's interesting because I think, you know, on some level there's always been sort of a resistance to these labels. You know, the grunge guys started to hate the term grunge or
Right.
alternative, and, you know,
Sure.
just like kind of what's happening in the EDM space right now.
Right.
At the same time, the marketing machine sort of needs
genres, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because otherwise, they don't know how to. They want,
Package it,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, yeah. I mean, genres have always existed primarily as a marketing tool rather than as a kind of an artistic kind of,
Yeah.
as being, it has more utility as a marketing tool than it indicates any kind of actual kind of artistic set of conventions.
Sure.
Perhaps.
Absolutely. So talk about why the DJ is so important.
Oh God, all these small questions. I mean,
Talk about why it's so important
to what?
you.
Like life to
No, to you.
to me. I mean, there's a quote that I always like citing in discussing the book, and this comes from Sarah Thornton, who's a club culture scholar, and she writes about the DJ as the orchestrator of a communal experience. And I mean, I think to me, right, as someone who not just writes about DJs but is a DJ. I just did a wedding in Little Rock the other week, and so I experience this in a visceral way. Is that you are there to basically create this communal experience on the dance floor through your song selection, through your mixing styles, and that based on those decisions, you either lift up the moods of the crowd, you bring them down, or you make them hate you, or you make them love you, depending on something as simple as how do I follow song A with song B. And I think that allure and that power is what draws people to DJing, is the sense that you can have this incredible effect on a crowd of people through very little than just your taste in some ways, right? And it's certainly a level of skill along with that as well. But I think that in the ways in which people experience music on that visceral, physical, sonic level, DJs are this incredibly important mediator between, again, to go back to the point we were saying before, there's, a billion songs you could choose from. The DJ is the one who sort of puts together that playlist that he thinks or she thinks will lead a crowd or an audience through an emotional experience, or a cerebral experience as part of that process.
Yeah.
Which, and I'm just thinking of this sort of off the top, as a writer, it's sort of the same thing. You're taking a series of ideas and you're stringing them together in a way that you think will make it compelling to get people to think a way that you want them to think or feel the way that you want them to feel. So I think DJing is like a lot of things in which people are organizing a vast set of things into something that is, again, I hate this term, but I'm going to use it again, into sort of a curated experience. And that experience is designed to elicit some kind of response from an audience.
Well, you mentioned in the book that you're sometimes haunted by the records you didn't play.
Oh yeah, because
It's fascinating.
yeah, because for every choice of what to include, that means you're excluding far more other things. And so, and I think partly, for me, when I set out to DJ, there's always this tension between, do I play a song that I know is going to hit, right, just through experience, or do I play the song that I really like that people haven't heard, and that there's a risk involved there. And, every choice that you make is this kind of decision between how far do I want to push it and how far do I want to kind of play it safe. And there are certainly many times where I will regret playing it safe because I'm like, well, that was like shooting fish in a barrel, playing like, the Jackson 5, for example, as opposed to I could have gone left and played something else just to see how that would have gone over. And other times you'll play a song that completely flops, even though you were sure because you were sure it was going to ace. And then you feel like, damn, man, maybe I should have played the Jackson 5 instead. And I got to rebuild the crowd. And so I think through the course of an evening, even as a quote-unquote successful evening, part of me is always thinking, well, that crowd was really with me. Maybe I should have pushed the boundaries a little bit. Maybe I should have flipped things their way that they weren't expecting. So I think that whenever you make this decision about what to include, you're also making a decision to exclude. And part of me is always going to be thinking, well, maybe I could have found a way to include that too.
In studying DJ culture, did you find any common characteristics amongst like the most successful DJs?
I don't know about common characteristics. I mean, I'm trying to think of the things that this particular community valued. And so I'm talking specifically about, Filipino American mobile disc jockeys in the 80s. A lot of it came down to not just about mixing skill, but also just presentation. One of the crews that almost universally was seen as the best crew was this crew out of San Francisco called Ultimate Creations. And partially forged a mystique around themselves because they had a really clean setup. Like they didn't let wires show, everything. They borrowed their color scheme from the Raiders, so everything was silver and black. So they made sure all of their equipment, their cases reflected that. And so they were just really well put together so that every time they performed, I mean, basically they had great brand management before that term ever existed.
Right.
And I think that was sort of an interesting thing for me to realize, that it wasn't just because they had the best DJs, and that was certainly, they had a great DJ in this guy, Genie G, but it was also just the fact that they put themselves out there in the way that other crews looked at them in awe and like, oh, I didn't realize that was possible to be that professional, to sort of put yourself across like that. So again, I don't know how applicable that is to sort of other examples, but to me, that's sort of a striking example of what it was that they valued at that point. Was it wasn't just about the music, it was also about how did you present yourself as a crew.
Right. Yeah. I see that. I mean, Deadmau5 does that, right, with his helmet, and I'm sure there's, DJ Newmark and his whole toy setup. Right.
There's something to having an identity that people can instantly see on a visual level beyond just the sonic aspect, and I'd be able to identify that, okay, we know what we're getting, and there's something comforting in that to a certain extent. I think partly what you see in this scene too is also beyond the basics of song selection, it's always kind of pushing the boundaries of style too. And so the things that they kind of latched onto was quick mixing, for example. So the idea that you could whittle through stacks of records on both sides of the turntables, and you were switching up songs every, 2, 3, 4 bars, but always keeping it on tempo. That was sort of a demonstration of skill that, I don't think in the Serato age, that's not difficult to do. From a technical point of view, that's actually really easy to do. Yeah. But back when you were working with analog media, that was actually something that it was a skill set that people respected. And then that gave way to scratching. When scratching arises in the late 1980s, that becomes a new level of how to demonstrate sort of your acumen on the turntables. And so the scene itself sees kind of these changing standards, basically, for what they respect from one another, what becomes seen as being the mark of being a good DJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as I think about it, I find it so interesting that, DJs, we traditionally associate a DJ with hip hop, but certainly electronic music, exists through DJs, and and there's a soul and funk tradition, and even within what you're talking about, right? Like these kids were not always playing hip hop; they were playing freestyle,
right?
And whatever was the music,
right,
that would move the crowd, right? And then there's the party DJs and the performance DJs and the competition DJs, and now I think there's a sort of debate, certainly in the dance music world, but even in hip hop to some extent, of sort of what constitutes a real DJ. If you're using too much technology,
right? Yeah,
right?
Yeah, sure.
If there are some guys we've talked about on this show whose equipment isn't actually plugged in when they're on stage, and it's just all for show.
It's for the presentation,
right.
And I don't want to debate the real, not real thing. Yeah. Because there's no answer to that.
Right. It's as real as the audience is willing to make it real.
But that's what I was going to say is like, what's consistent through all of that is that the crowd loves it. And, every successful DJ, obviously by definition, has found a way to make whatever he does, whether it's dancing while there's music playing, work for the people that are watching him do it. And I believe there's something to that collective experience that we want to have, that we want someone to lead us through.
Right. I mean, the thing that I think I make this analogy in the book is that a DJ may be in power, but only to the extent that the audience gives them that power. Mm-hmm. So what the audience and the crowd on the dance floor is doing is basically saying, I'm going to let you take me through this journey. But if at the point which I don't like it, I'm going to leave the dance floor and I'm going to ruin your night. And so as much as we think of the DJ as being in control, again, that control is it's given to them. They're allowed to sort of pilot the ship so long as the crowd is with them. Yeah. And I think this raises an interesting philosophical point, which is, can you be a good DJ if audiences don't like you? And you could be the most highly technically skilled DJ on the planet, but if no one wants to listen to you or dance to what you're playing, I think it raises an interesting question as to does that mean you're very good at all? And and this is not to create like a false binary between like it's all about crowd pleasing versus it's all about your skills. But at the end of the day, DJs are not solitary. Their craft is completely dependent on an audience being receptive to it in a way that I think is different than like other parts of art. You could be, a painter who maybe a lot of people don't get your art. That doesn't mean that you're not really a good artist necessarily. But with a DJ, that symbiotic relationship to the audience, you can't really remove that. A DJ by themselves is, they're still DJing, but it's the audience that sort of gives their identity as a DJ any kind of real meaning to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So talking about success, you talk a little bit about this idea of psychic capital.
Yeah.
Can you explain that for us?
Yeah, these guys and I keep saying guys partly as shorthand, but it's also because it was predominantly, a male scene as the DJ scene tends to be, and there are reasons for that which we can get into. But for the members of the mobile scene, they certainly were able to make some actual money off of this, but most of that money got instantly reinvested into buying new records or upgrading equipment. Like, no one got interested in mobile DJing because they thought they were going to, pay their bills off of it. It was really the actual income was pretty secondary. The psychic income is just another way of saying that partly what you get out of it is this, social status. It's fame, right? It's popularity.
Right.
The people, and again, these are high school students, right? So they're comparing being a star DJ to being like the star quarterback. And so we understand, thanks, to 1,000 like high school movies, like what is the hierarchy of fame within a high school social environment? And for these, again, mostly young men, DJing was a way for them to kind of rise up that hierarchy in a way that wasn't dependent on, being class president or being the quarterback, but they could be sort of like the hot DJ on campus. And this was a way for them to be able to build a reputation among themselves, among their friends. If there were men among girls, that was a big part of it too. So that psychic income that I'm talking about is just another way of saying it's part of, and this was a quote from Corman Roke, who was one of the members of Spintronics at a Daly City. For him, psychic income just meant that he didn't have to get paid in physical dollars. He was getting paid in rep. He was getting paid in props, to use a hip hop term, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny. That feels right. If you open any magazine, newspaper, website about the music business today, like the business has sort of dominated the conversation, and it's all about how much artists can make or can't make, right? And that's not to say people should just, not worry about the finances and make music for the props, but it does seem like some of that's gotten lost in the discourse about music today.
What, the psychic income quality of it? I think the thing you got to keep in mind, none of these DJs that I write about were thinking that they were going to become professional DJs. They were doing it as something that it seemed like it was fun, and they took it very seriously. But it wasn't like their ambition was, I want to grow up to be, a professional DJ. And of course, a handful of them, that is what they ended up doing. But the vast majority for the vast majority of them, it was just something to do on the side because they could be with their friends, and it was fun. And I think that to the extent that psychic income has power, it's, when you try to translate, okay, so how do I turn that psychic income and how do I make it into actual income? Therein sort of lies a trick to a lot of things that begin as hobbies that we might want to pursue as professions or careers that may not be as easy to make that transition. I do think that there is a fascination that people in the media have with how much DJs get paid. And I think partially it's based around this devaluation of the idea that DJs should get paid much of anything. Like people can't believe that Tiesto gets paid whatever the fuck he gets paid, but we don't have that same conversation about Beyonce or about or about the CEO of a company, because we presume they should be highly compensated because that fits into our narrow worldview of how people get paid. But like the idea that a DJ should be making $10 million a year, like that doesn't make sense to me. Well, yeah, but if you look at the bare basics, like how much money do they make for other people? Then it's like that income actually does make sense. I think people just see DJing as being frivolous and therefore not worthy of compensation, and that that's ignorance,
right? Exactly. I was just gonna say, are the people that are saying that are people that have never been to a show and seen a DJ do what he does,
right? Or who just don't understand like the amount of money that's being generated by people going to clubs in Vegas or wherever you are, DJing. And I don't know if this is partly what Josh is getting at too. I mean, there's any number of miscontents that are malcontents that come up, or discontents that come up in the idea of DJing as big business, right? There's a lot of just debate. Yeah, there's a lot of things that it makes people uncomfortable thinking and talking about that. But I think this to go back to my previous point, this fixation we have and how much do DJs get paid? Again, a lot of that comes out of the fact that there's a certain segment of people just assume that DJs shouldn't get paid much of anything because all you're doing is just playing records, man. I could do that. Well, if you could do what a lot of these people are doing it, why aren't you out there doing it?
Right.
And I'm kind of feeling like, there's probably a little bit more to it than just playing records,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I have some amount of anxiety about any cultural endeavor as big business.
Sure.
Because, you talk about, this, the mobile scene becoming, sort of happening in this vacuum, right, where it's allowed to grow,
because there's not that much money,
right, and there's not that much scrutiny, right,
right,
and I think you referenced some other, the British punk scene and the rave scene and certainly the New York hip hop scene. Like these things happen kind of in quiet, small communities that become bigger communities that then, turn into businesses.
Right.
And I have some feeling that that's necessary for these kind of movements to develop, and that, as the internet unearths more of everything that's happening on the planet at any given time, that's going to become a greater challenge for this sort of cultural evolution to happen. Because
things don't have enough time to evolve on their own before they're sort of quote unquote discovered. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. And part of it is the attachment. There's a certain kind of person who wants to discover
the next big thing.
Yeah, or who wants to be part of something that no one else knows about.
Right.
So, right, we've spent a bunch of time in the competitive gaming space. It's like this weird, nerdy world of like...
Fascinating. Yeah,
right?
Completely.
So, again, that's like an offshoot of mainstream video gaming, but it's not. It's its own little world. And, I think it gets... The attachment that members of that community have to it is somehow proportionate to how fringe it is. Mm-hmm.
Right. Because everyone wants to be in on the secret thing. But that's how things don't become secrets anymore, right?
Right.
That's I think the core kind of contradiction.
Sure.
I mean, I think one of the great transformations of how we think about popular culture, especially over the 20th century, let alone into the 21st, is that, it wasn't really that long ago, probably our parents' or grandparents' generation, in which pop culture was really just completely dismissed as fluff and as being unimportant and as being trash culture. So it didn't live up to the kind of import that we put on classical music or on theater or literature, all these things. And what we've seen is that over the course of the last, probably since rock and roll, that pop culture now exists sort of on somewhat of an equal playing field with everything else out there. On the one side, as someone who loves pop culture, it kind of feels like, well, we won finally in terms of people take this stuff seriously because it should be taken seriously. But on the flip side, I think what comes with that is this idea that partly what propelled pop culture up that chain of importance is this idea that anything can be monetized, right? And that what people are, when people are looking for the next big thing, what they're looking for is something that hasn't been monetized yet, so they can be an early investor on that and they can therefore get paid off of it. And that, this is sort of how capitalism works, right? You buy low and you sell high. And I think pop culture has become a really attractive realm for people to try to, dig through and find stuff that they can invest in as a way of not necessarily helping the culture or whatever it is we're talking about succeed, the phenomena or community succeed, but rather how can I make a quick buck off of it? And that driving force is both what helps pop culture's certain communities succeed, but it's also the very danger that lies in that success. So, the reason why the mobile scene, I think, never mapped onto other people's consciousness was partially because they never made the transition, unlike hip-hop, unlike house music or techno music. They didn't make the transition from playing records to making records, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But if that mobile scene had been able to make that jump successfully, like, again, hip-hop's is a great example, because by 1979, hip-hop culture, what we think of hip-hop culture in New York City, was on the wane. 6 months, 12 months later, that thing would have been dead. It would have just been a nice memory of a local party culture that no one else cared about.
Yeah.
But Rapper's Delight changed everything. Now, you could argue that was a great thing for hip-hop because it gave it a new life. It kind of opened the door for how we think of hip-hop today. But it also irrevocably changed hip-hop from being a very local, live performance, you experience it in the moment culture, to something that could now be commodified and would make people billions of dollars. Is that a net win for hip-hop? Is that a net loss for hip-hop? I don't know. I think one could argue both ways. And I think that same contradiction confronts every piece of culture that we hold dear to ourselves. That tension is never far away, because capitalism, it eats itself, and the things that we love can be easily corrupted and perverted for the same reasons that we got to know it to begin with.
That's a really uplifting message.
I mean, I think, but
No, you're right.
well, I think the trick is, and I think what keeps us engaged is we're always hoping that the thing that we love stays one step ahead of it, right? And that it always manages to be just outside of that grasp and the jaws of capital. But to me, at the same time, again, I grew up in the West Coast, right? I wouldn't know about hip hop if not for the commodification of hip hop, and hip hop changed my life. Of
course.
So am I resentful for that? It's kind of hard to be, but I can still say that transformation into a commodity also creates problems along the way, and I don't know how to resolve that. As someone who studies pop culture and as someone who loves pop culture and is engaged in it, I'm always aware that contradiction is always there, because again, the relationship between pop culture and capitalism, you don't get pop culture without capitalism. Otherwise, we'd all be living through folk culture, and that's a very different experience.
Right. Yeah. Well, on that, you've done a really interesting job of blending your personal passion with your career. And again, being a pop culture academic to some extent. How's that work for you?
I think I've been incredibly fortunate, which is to say that the things that I wanted to do and the things that interested me, I always managed to find avenues and outlets that were willing to support me doing that. So whether, I wanted to write about music and sort of places like Herb and the San Francisco Bay Guardian, rest in peace, to both of them, as print magazines, they are print outlets. They gave me that opportunity to cut my teeth and to do that. So I'm very thankful to have had that opportunity. In wanting to study what I study as an academic, I had a department and advisors who were willing to say, yeah, why don't you do a dissertation on Filipino American mobile DJs? That sounds like a really great idea. That could have been very different in another school where they'd been like, God, no, why would anyone want to read this? So, I think a lot of it is I've always been on the one hand, it's been important to me to be able to pursue those things that I'm interested in, but I'm also dependent on sort of the generosity and the acceptance of other places that are willing to let me do that. I haven't had to make hard choices, in other words, in ways that I know friends and colleagues have, because they haven't found the same kind of support. Especially as someone who's been freelance writer now for over 20 years. I can't imagine. I mean, I cannot remotely imagine trying to navigate the current landscape if I were to start now in 2015 as opposed to when I did start in 1994. Like I could have, back in 20 years ago, if I wanted to pursue a full-time living as a freelance writer, I mean, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't like a crazy idea. People did it all the time.
Absolutely.
Like you could string together like gigs here and gigs there. Like when I talk to people who are trying to do that today, I'm like, no, hell no, I wouldn't want to do that. It seems impossible. So, again, I think I was a benefit of timing to some degree, that I kind of developed these interests at a point at which there was more of a infrastructure that would have supported my ability to do so.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I mean, it's sort of, to me, it wasn't like a strategy like, oh, I want to be a pop culture scholar. It's like, no, I'm interested in these things personally.
Right.
And if my career is as an academic, why not find a way to bridge those two things to make it more organic. And again, I've been lucky to be at a department that supports my decision to do so. And I was lucky to find a publisher in Duke University that let me write a book about Filipino American mobile DJs in the San Francisco Bay Area. I don't take any of those things for granted.
Yeah.
Can I ask, you said hip hop changed your life.
Yeah.
I feel like I hear that a lot, but I never actually think about that. Like how did, people say that a lot. Hip hop
Sure.
has been such a huge, impact on our culture, but how did it change your?
I mean, in my case, for me, I discovered, my introduction to hip hop came initially in 1986, or maybe it was 87, when a friend of mine gave me a cassette tape that had Run DMC's Raising Hell on one side and License to Ill by the Beastie Boys on the other. And I mean, I loved both sides of it. But of course, I think maybe in ninth grade, and I was too young to understand that this was a genre. Like, if I like this, I could find other stuff like it.
Yeah.
It really wasn't until 1989, so about 3 years later, where I got introduced to De La Soul through K-Rock. And if you're in Los Angeles, you know K-Rock as being the modern rock, alternative rock
Right.
station. But back in the 80s, they played a lot of hip hop, especially groups like De La Soul, because they were seen as alternative, right? So I went out, heard him on K-Rock, went out and got 3 Feet High and Rising. And that was sort of my gateway drug. Like, once I heard that, I was like, everything I hear from now on, I want it to sound like this. I want to
Right.
know everything I can about this. And sorry, this is super long-winded to answer your question, Cassandra. But how hip-hop changed my life was being interested in hip-hop, being interested in its history, being interested in its social, and especially in the early 90s, in its political impact.
Right.
It made me into more of a critical thinker. You combine sort of hip-hop's racial politics of that era with my own kind of coming of age in college and taking ethnic studies classes and developing an awareness of my own kind of racial and political identity. Hip-hop certainly was a huge catalyst for that. I don't know if I would have been as interested in issues about race and about justice and about society if not for listening to people like Public Enemy and all these other artists that were making those, making social consciousness songs that we described now back then. That certainly fueled my interest in wanting to write about music and to write about culture, because I was critically engaged with it thanks to hip hop. And I was writing about hip hop in my classes because I thought it was such an important phenomena that there needed to be more stuff from an academic point of view being focused on it. So in a lot of ways, I credit my interest in hip hop in both why I wanted to be a writer on one hand, but also why I wanted to be a scholar. And it was the catalyst to a lot of those things that, again, 20 years later, have blossomed into my current set of careers and activities.
Right. That's awesome. Do you bring up a lot of like what Kendrick Lamar and his team is talking about in class currently?
I mean, not this past semester, only because I'm not really teaching a class where that enters into it. But certainly, I would think that Kendrick and his last, his whole catalog, but especially the last two albums, offer no small number of things in which you could sort of engage with in a classroom in terms of how he talks about race, how he talks about Los Angeles, how he talks about communities out here. To me, he's been, as someone who I think in recent years, I find myself listening to less and less hip hop, and that's not because of hip hop. It's because I'm just getting older. I know that Tyler, the creator, is not making music for people of my generation, and that's totally cool. I'm not mad at that. Like, do your thing.
Right.
But Kendrick, to me, is a way of, he's really revitalized my interest in really intensely sitting and listening to an album and just letting myself be kind of not just being a critic about it, but just being a fan again and just really sitting with and listening to an album over and over again. Not because I'm professionally obligated to do so, but because that shit moves me.
Right.
So I think, but to get back to your question, if I wanted to bridge that into a classroom setting, there's a lot to Kendrick Lamar's music that creates, so-called teachable moments.
Right.
Yeah.
And not to get so politically charged right now, but there's an article on the NY Mag on the cover right now that's talking about a school in Brooklyn, a liberal school, private school, where they're teaching third graders, 8 years old, right, on race.
Okay.
And they're dividing them by race, and then having them talk about the racial, all of those insecurities in society and all of those issues, and then having them get back together once a week with the other kids and then talk about those things. But the families, these parents are all super liberal, but they're like, dude, they're 8 years old. I mean, are we really talking about this whole race thing when they're just enjoying playing on the playground together and they're not seeing colors? So, we wait till college to talk about these things, but in reality, high school is the worst time. People are so mean, even in middle school, you get called a beaner, you get called all of those things start happening, right? So I just wonder, I agree with you, hip hop has always educated us on that. Malcolm Gladwell talks about getting familiar with the culture and actually diving in, and I think hip hop is a really great way to do that. But I mean, how do you feel like there's, aside from hip hop, and do you feel like there's something else missing in our education system?
Well, I would say in general, the ways in which we talk about race in this country clearly have not worked well. So to me, new ideas and new strategies, it's worth considering simply because we can kind of see the ruinous routes that we've taken in the past. I do think, that this question of how early do you introduce kids to the concept of race, part of it is it's not as if they're not being introduced to it outside of a classroom or outside of a family setting.
Yeah.
Like, you can't keep them outside of how the rest of society treats it. Now, that said, again, this goes back to sort of just my experience as a parent. I do think me and my wife had a lot of conversations about, at what point do we really begin talking about it? And I think what we decided was, no, it's not like we were pulling her aside at 3 years old necessarily, but I think by the time she was in elementary school, why not just sort of talking about it? And because partly her school would celebrate things like MLK Day, right? That's just part of the curriculum
Right.
now. So we wanted to make sure that whatever she was getting from her school, we were kind of augmenting or, offering sort of alternative interventions into that. If they're going to celebrate Columbus Day, let's
Right.
talk a little bit about colonization and talking about genocide. And that might seem really heavy to sort of put on someone in elementary school, but again, they're already being indoctrinated. They're already being exposed to these ideas. As a parent, as a scholar, as someone who takes race really seriously, I want to at least make sure that if she's going to get this education from other means, I need to have some kind of role to play in it. And like I said before, to me, this country has never really tackled race in a particularly constructive way. We're constantly trying to figure this out. I'm open to sort of new ideas with it simply because we can't keep doing what we've been doing because clearly that hasn't worked.
Sorry.
No, that's good.
Heavy tangent.
I guess. Okay. Let's go lighter. Favorite DJ?
My first impulse is what kind of DJ are we talking about?
Tell us about the
the DJ who made me want to become a DJ, Benny B. Did you know Benny up in the Bay?
Yeah, not only do I know Benny from ABB, but my grandmother lived off of Adams.
Yeah.
Directly across the street from Benny's family.
Okay.
And so we played together at 4 or 5 years
That's
old.
crazy.
Yeah. I was friends with his older brother because I'm a little bit
wild.
older than him.
Okay.
But he would be out there and me and his brother Byron.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Benny B, Ben Nickelberry. He's probably best known for running the independent Barry hip hop label ABB Records, but he also was and still is a record collector and a DJ. And he used to do a show on KALX, which is the college radio station for UC Berkeley, which is how I first started DJing by being by working at the radio station. And I just have this really distinct memory of Benny would bring down his own tables, and he had one of those old wood-paneled mixers. I can't remember if it was a realistic mixer or maybe it was like the Jazzy Jeff special that who put out all those cheap mixers back in the days that wasn't realistic, but everyone had one.
Like Tascam?
No, man. Oh. Like they had they were in the back of the Source. They
Gemini
were
or
Gemini,
something?
right? It was
Yeah.
like the wood panel
Yeah.
Gemini mixer.
Remember those, Mark?
And he would bring those down to the radio studio and would be cutting up doubles on it. And he just looked like he was having so much fun that when I saw him do that, I just felt like, man, I want to do that too. And I still to this day credit him with being at least that initial inspiration about seeing another DJ, performing the craft and wanting to do it as well.
Nice.
So, whether he's my favorite DJ or not, he certainly was, this gateway into why I wanted to become it. I think one of the best party rockers I know would be someone like a J-Rock of the Beat Junkies or Shortcut, who I actually got to DJ. We had a mutual friend's wedding in Shanghai that we both went out there to DJ. That was really fun, DJing
Nice.
next to Short, and just seeing him do, how he works it up close. Like, he is so good. It's just seamless, and he makes it seem effortless, even though I know there is a ton of training that goes into be able to execute like that. But I love DJs who are able to work with multiple genres and still make it seem like it all makes sense together. And I think for me, I tend to get stuck in ruts where, over the course of an evening, I'll do like a hip hop set, and then I'll do a funk set, I'll do a Latin set, and I'm sort of more tedious, no, not tedious. I'm more timid about kind of mixing it up and going from, let's say, dance hall track to like, a Latin track to whatever, and Short does. He'll move. Every song will be something different, but it all makes sense together. And I think I really admire sort of DJs who have just a command of musical knowledge to know how these things will fit together. So yeah, those are the ones who sort of immediately come to mind.
What about a performance that stands out to you?
I think this was 1994. It was the West Coast Regional DMC Championships that were held at Club DV8 in San Francisco. And I saw Shortcut do the Impeach the President juggle.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen a juggle done before, and that blew my fucking mind. Like, I could figure out what it was he was exactly doing, but I didn't even realize that this is something that one could do, which is to reconstruct an entirely new drum beat from two different drum beats. That just stays with me forever, just because it was just sort of opening my eyes to just a level of technical and stylistic possibilities that I just didn't know existed. That certainly stuck with me.
So I'm almost positive I was a judge at that.
You probably were. Yeah.
So it was Crazy Legs. If I have the year right. So I definitely judged when I was at Herb.
Okay.
I went up there and I judged the DMC at DV8.
Yeah.
And I remember
Shortcut won.
Yeah.
He won that year.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know if you went, it was also the same weekend as the Roots' first performance in San Francisco.
I didn't see that.
Okay. Which is the other reason why I remember that weekend,
bet.
because I saw them. That blew my mind. I went to see Shortcut at the DMC championship, the regional championship, and that also completely floored me.
No, I think that was the show, because there was some discussion about Legs was like, well, Short's a rock steady DJ. I don't know if I should be voting for him.
Right.
The officials are like, don't worry about it. So anyway, I was there.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's funny.
Yeah.
It's a small world. The West Coast in that era, especially in the Bay Area, man, you just felt like it was a fishbowl, but it was an amazing fishbowl, and that everything just seemed to be centered there.
Yeah.
So that stands out. I'm trying to think of a more recent experience that was super memorable. And the thing is, even back then and especially now, I just don't go out that much. I think partly as a hip hop fan, you're so used to hip hop shows sucking because the sound's bad, because the performers. And I think things have gotten much better. I think people have gotten better. Like, I think I saw Kanye in concert, and I realized, rappers have gotten so much better at like live shows.
Kanye likes to do it all by himself.
Right. But,
which probably should be how they do it.
But as a 90s kid, it's like hip-hop shows were not fun to go to. Like, it just didn't sound very good. And so I just didn't get used to, like, going to shows a lot. So I'm just trying to think of, when's the most recent time I went out and was like, man, that's really good. Certainly, you mentioned Newmark earlier. He did a show at Grand Performances in downtown LA, and he had his whole setup. His whole setup.
I gotta see it.
I've always loved how imaginative and creative Newmark, and the sense of play, like, DJing, certainly there are a lot of DJs who take their craft very seriously, but that shouldn't get in the way of there being just a sense of play involved with it. And I think Newmark, as much as any DJ, is just such an expert at working that in a way that's not gimmicky. He's just finding ways of incorporating other sounds and styles into a set. And I appreciate the level of care and fun that goes into sort of his thinking with that. So that was last summer. That was probably one of the last times I went to go see a DJ specifically to see them DJ.
Yeah.
I know we're not allowed to ask you questions, but how come you get to pick what DJs are good? Like back then, what was like? We don't know anything about Josh. Apparently, we find out all these things about him in his past because he doesn't really talk about himself that much. But
so I was an editor at Herb magazine, which was a magazine covering DJ culture, and they asked. I was probably in San Francisco already, so it was easy for travel. But they asked us to have someone come participate as a judge.
Was that fun?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, first of all, I got to spend a day with Crazy Legs and a couple other guys who I'm not forgetting who were, inspirations to me. And, a day spent listening to DJs and watching them, do their craft.
Yeah, but you're judging them.
always a
That's
good
like
day.
totally crazy. That's awesome.
I think Pam the Funkstress might have been on that.
She was, yeah, she was, and she
Yeah.
did her mix.
She took her bra off
right,
while
right,
she-
right, and as well
under
as
her shirt.
as cutting it up with her breast. That
Yeah,
was her.
yeah.
That was kind of one of the things that she did back
That's
then.
right.
But yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That was the same show.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that was fun. So no, it's great. You're judging them, but you're not. Look, they were all good. They all made it
Right.
to a certain point.
But
one
did
of
you
them
have
stood
like
out as the best.
favoritism because you like love certain DJs over others?
I remember being conscious of that at the time. That Shortcut clearly to me he was better. But I did wonder, like, do I think he's better because I already think Rocksteady's better, and I knew Apollo and we weren't friends, but I'd interviewed them for the magazine, right? So
Yeah.
I had this preconceived, back to my earlier point about we don't necessarily know what's good, right?
Right.
We tell ourselves what's good.
I mean, I think of that year because Short would go on to represent the West Coast Regional, and he lost to Rock Raider in the national championships. And there was I mean, there's always controversies around any kind of contest, but in particular, I think people, and rest in peace to Rock Raider, is they felt like Raider's set was much more body trick focused, and
Right.
and Short had more creative kind of skills. And I think back to this key battle I write about in the book, which was probably 1989 or 1990, between a young Q-Bert before he sort of had kind of national fame, and this guy Jazzy Jim, who was a DJ out of the South Bay. And it was a contest in which they were the finalists, and Jazzy Jim was a really skilled quick mixer, and Q-Bert was coming with scratches. And the judges really didn't know what to do because it was like comparing apples and oranges. They were
Right.
completely two different schools of thought, really. Jazzy ended up winning the night, but as we know historically, Q-Bert won the war over the long term in terms of scratching, became much more dominant. But it's sort of like, what do you do with two completely different set of standards? I'm not going to say that Rock Raider didn't deserve to win, but to me, knowing what Raider's routine was, and I eventually did see Raider's routine, and knowing what Short could do, to me, where I lean, I think Short was the better DJ because it wasn't just dependent on like these acrobatic tricks, which are nice, but what he was doing in terms of like transforming what you could do with a set of records, to me, that was a bigger innovation. But again, obviously people disagreed at that particular DMC, and Raider came away the champion. And I don't begrudge him for that. These standards are always going to be, these debate around standards are implicit to any kind of artistic practice.
So let's go back a second to another way that hip hop sucks.
Yeah. Man, Josh, you're really on this.
No, I'm just kidding. But no, I'm actually not kidding. So
It's the money.
because I know you're a serious record collector,
Yeah.
and I
Semi-serious.
read some article that sort of walked us through your collection, which is pretty impressive.
Great
So
pictures.
Whole room in your house.
Oh yeah, Eline
dedicated.
Potts from Dust and Grooves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
such an awesome picture.
But and you mentioned something there that stuck out to me, that hip hop cover art tends to not be very good by cover art standards.
I mean, did I say that? I mean,
Yeah, you said the Snoop Dogg.
oh God, I mean that is one.
Right, and you
but
said,
that is,
but the
yeah.
point is, you said even by hip hop standards,
Right.
it
It was
wasn't.
right. It was pretty
right?
bad.
And and I think about that, right? I mean, I think about the contrast with dance music, which very similar, a lot of parallels to hip hop, but a lot of those records are coming imports, and 12-inch single would have some kind of really cool printing or embossing. Like, they put money into the packaging and thought and creativity into the packaging. And I think that stands a stark contrast. I mean, certainly if we talk about 12 inches,
Yeah.
most hip hop 12 inches are white sleeve, black sleeve.
Keep it simple, right? I mean, what's interesting is when I was going through my own collection, so I have probably somewhere in the ballpark of, I don't know, somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 hip hop 12 inches. And I decided at one point a few years ago that I was going to just go through and purge as much of the stuff that I knew that I was never going to want to play or mess with again. And that ended up being about 2/3 of the collection. But in the process, I was basically also looking for stuff to sell, because not that I intended to collect stuff that would be, have a high value later. But as I discovered, apparently there are people out there, largely in Germany and Japan, that really want third-rate Mobb Deep knockoffs from the mid-'90s. I mean, God bless. Like, I'm not mad at that, because I made a nice piece of change off of it. But what was funny is I realized that there was a consistent design pattern where, even if I don't remember the record itself, as I was just kind of flipping through to find stuff to sell, I began to see these patterns in what would become like the high-value records. A lot of them had graduated fills, which is basically you go from a darker shade of one color and at the bottom it's a lighter shade.
Right.
And it was the particular fonts that went into it that I could identify what would be like a good money font. And so if I saw that in the collection, I'm like, okay, I bet this is worth $50. And sure enough, like more often than not, I would pull it out. And for whatever reason, what it means is there are always these trends. And even when we think there's no design at all, there are trends, because at this point around circa the early to mid 1990s, there was a way in which a lot of these small labels, hip hop labels, they all design their labels kind of the same way. They use quote unquote cheap looking fonts. They might have thrown a little bit of graphics in just to make it stand out, in a rack by using super early Photoshop effects. And somehow this creates a particular design motif, which if you compare those 12 inches from, let's say, 93 versus from 87 versus from 1999, you can see differences in how design changed. Now, whether any of this makes it for good design or not, that's a secondary, that's beside the point. But there are definitely trends in how people were designing even something as simple as a 12-inch label, which, again, I wouldn't have thought about until I started going through my collection. I could begin to see these things emerge through it.
Yeah. So you're still collecting?
Yeah, I mean, certainly not with the same kind of ferocity, and I think my bank account is thankful for that, as I did before. I mean, I think, when I first started in the late 90s, I started collecting. It was really just about quantity and accumulation, and so it's about just bringing in as many things that I could theoretically do stuff with. And I wasn't sampling or anything; it was just stuff that really acted to play for my radio show. When you're doing a weekly radio show for 3 hours a week, that kind of feeds into the desire to bring in a lot of records just because you have stuff to fill the time with. As I've gotten older, I've tried to be more selective about it, partially because, I kind of got a lot of the stuff that I was looking for when I was younger. Partly that's it, and partly I also just realized, like, I'm never going to have enough time in my lifetime to listen to everything I have already. Right. Like, I really have to justify, why do I need, like, more records? And there has to be a specific reason why I need that 7-inch or that 12-inch or that LP. Part of it is just avarice. It's just it's bragging rights. It's to say, well, I have this thing that other people don't. But I try to get away from that as well. And I've gotten rid of, stuff that's incredibly collectible, because I realize I don't really care for this. Right. It's going to be in someone's. It's going to serve someone better who they'll really enjoy it. Sure. Me holding on to stuff that's rare just for the sake of its rarity. Life's too short for that kind of shit. Right. And besides, I can flip that to get stuff that I want. That it's more meaningful to myself.
How do you remember what you have?
I don't, and that's the problem. Like I mean, I don't do this with big money items, but for like $10 7-inches, I will discover that I've bought stuff twice because I just forgot that I owned it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it's so and anytime I buy a new record, there's always part of me. It's like, okay, am I absolutely sure I don't already own this? And if I'm not sure, I will literally whip out my phone and put it into the reminders, check to make sure I don't already have this, because I mean, at one point, I actually knew everything that was in my collection, and I took false pride in being able to know that I had it memorized. Like, I'm way past that point. Like, I need a freaking spreadsheet to figure out what I still own. And the worst is when one example of this, I was getting ready for a wedding, the Little Rock wedding I mentioned earlier, and I was going to bring out a bunch of 7-inches to play for cocktail hour, and I was looking for my copy of Michael Jackson's Rock With You. And I couldn't find it. It was not in the box. It wasn't alphabetized where it should have been. It wasn't in my other boxes. And after, I probably spent a good, 60 to 90 minutes going through everywhere I could think to find it. And then it dawned on me, shit, you know what? I don't think I actually ever owned it. I just thought I did because it just seemed like something I would already have.
Yeah.
And so I went out afterwards and bought it again because it's not an expensive 7-inch. And so I have a copy of it now. But I would not be surprised if 2 months from now I'm in some random box. I'm like, oh wait, I did own it. I have no idea if I do. Maybe I have 2 copies. Maybe I just have the one. I don't know anymore. Again, if it's with a cheapie, it's not a big deal. If I start doing that with stuff that costs me a few $100s, I'm gonna be kind of annoyed at myself. I do have one other example. I couldn't find this kind of obscure 45 King EP that has a copy of this great song Brainstorm on it has Latia rapping on it. Could not find it. I knew it was in my collection someplace. I just didn't know where it went. I just went and bought a second copy. And then 6 months later, I found it missleeved, which is why I didn't find it the first time. I'm like, I now have 2 copies of it. Well, I'll just sell off the other one. I don't need anymore. But that's how stupid it got. It's like I was buying records that I knew I had that I just couldn't find. And I just bought another copy so I knew where it was.
That's hilarious.
It's a sickness, man. It's a sickness.
How's music playing a role in your household?
That's a great question. I mean, I think partly parenthood is like an amazing exercise in solipsism and narcissism, because you just assume that everything your kid does is somehow a reflection of you.
Of course.
When really it's them it's just them being themselves, really. Right. But I do love watching the ways in which my daughter engages with music. And I think certainly when she was younger, one of the primary ways in which she listened to any music is whatever I played in the car. And so she actually would know the choruses to like a lot of kind of semi-obscure 60s soul songs, just because I would play them all the time in the car. Yeah, and I love that aspect of it. Now that she's getting older and now that she has access to YouTube, she's coming into more of her own musical awareness to some extent. Again, we were talking about Pitch Perfect before. I mean, that's sort of one example of it. It is funny because she came downstairs and she declared, I want to memorize more raps. And I'm thinking, okay, I can help you with that. Maybe first start by not referring to them as raps, but sure, funny. if you want to listen to stuff, let me, and I think I put like 3 Feet High and Rising on her iPhone to listen to. I don't think she actually has listened to it. And that's just part of my conceit. Like, I want her to be exposed to the stuff that was important to me, though she probably would be just as happy to listen to like Iggy Azalea's new album, which makes me want to kill myself. But that's fine. God, yeah. But that's fine because again, it's not for me to plan her course. She's going to come to music on her own in her own way. So I think I've created a compromise, where I will still play the stuff that I want to listen to. But if I know there's songs that she likes, I'll add that into sort of the car playlist so that she can hear the things that she likes. But you don't rule it off the
table, like we cannot play Iggy Azalea whatsoever.
I mean, there are some things where I just don't want to listen to it. Yeah. But for a minute, I didn't have a problem with Fancy. Like, I'm okay with Fancy.
Right.
At least the first verse, and then I kind of get tired of listening to her about halfway through. Right. But for the most part, the things that my daughter wants to listen to, I don't have a big problem wanting to listen to them too. Again, I think for me, as I get older, I definitely want to be open-minded in terms of what I listen to, and I don't want to be the same person I was when I was in my 20s, where I was really closed off to a lot of things because I was being young and stupid. I sort of have told this story to other people, but there are certain albums where, because I didn't really get the concept, or I just was too fixated on wanting it to sound like the old stuff. Like, I didn't like Low End Theory when Low End Theory first came out, because I wanted it to sound more like People's Instinctive Travels, which I loved. I'm like, this is how ignorant I was. I'm like, why is it everything so bass heavy? Like, I didn't get the fact that Low End Theory referred to the bass. I thought they were talking about people's asses or whatever. Sure. And I just didn't get it. And of course, now Low End Theory is probably, if not my favorite Tribe album. It's close number 2. But I was just that kid who was like, if it doesn't sound the way that the first stuff sounds like, I don't care about it. Like, I don't like Paul's Boutique for the same reason. And of course, a lot of people didn't like Paul's Boutique for the same reason. Right. As I get older, I just want to remind myself, don't be like who I was. Be open to stuff. Right. Even stuff that you may not think you like. Figure out what's interesting about it, and you don't have to love it, but at least be open to engaging with it. Right. And
so what's something that? Give us an example.
Like something new, right?
Yeah, something you.
I'm just trying to think of what's the most recent kind of big quote unquote pop album. I mean, I like Taylor Swift's "Shake It Off." I mean, it's basically Mickey, but I mean that's not a bad thing, I guess. I don't know if I actually really tried to sit with her album because she doesn't really need me to help her out in that respect, and I'll probably end up hearing her stuff regardless. Right. So it's, on the one hand, I don't go out of my way to be like a hardcore poptimist and only listen to everything that's out that's big and popping. But on the flip side, I don't like avoid that stuff just because it's big and popping either.
Right.
So I think
I'm still trying to get over that. I
yeah.
do.
I mean, I channel
avoid
surf
it,
when
but-
when I drive. If I'm not listening to NPR, like I will spend a few moments listening to kind of like the pop stations
what's
just to
on?
see what's kind of rifling through there
Mm-hmm.
and seeing if there's stuff that I might be open to.
What do you think?
Of what? The current state?
Yeah.
I mean, again, this goes back to my point about kind of like Odd Future and like Tyler the Creator. Pop music is generally made for people who are in their late teens or early 20s. Like that's the key demographic. It's always been like that. You know, when Elvis was making music, when the Beatles were making music, they were making music for young people. I am not a young person anymore. Artists are not making music that is meant to like speak to me. That's fine. And if I don't feel connected to it, partly it's because I'm not the intended audience.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's out there that I'm not like hugely crazy about. It doesn't really speak to me, but that's because I'm in my 40s now and they're making music that's for like 17-year-olds.
Right. Right.
So are there any new guys that you check for? I mean, you talked about the Kendrick record.
certainly.
Yeah.
You know, I really liked, speaking of Odd Future, you know, I really like Earl Sweatshirt's last out. I like Doris a lot. His more recent album, not quite as into, but that's fine. I'm trying to think of, you know, the people that I'll try to make a point to kind of check for. And the problem is that list is so big, I have a hard time just kind of plucking a name out of the ether. You know, I'm trying to think of, you know, Janet Jackson's supposed to come back with a new album this year. We haven't heard from her in a minute. Like, I'll be curious to see what her stuff sounds like. I'll always give Beyonce a shake because so many of the people I know adore her on multiple levels, not just musically, but socially and culturally and politically. So yeah, I'll just give it a listen just to see what it's like. You know, I used to be someone who always listened to a new Jay-Z project. I am steadily getting away from that because he's been so disappointing over the last few.
Yeah.
But Kanye, I'll still check for because I think whether I love his stuff or not, I think he's an interesting artist.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that
he
he's,
pushes
you know, he pushes.
boundaries.
Right. And
Yeah,
I don't
he
like
totally does.
this. I don't have to like what he pushes with,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I'm
Style
intrigued by it.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool. Yeah, but his style, like he definitely pushes the boundary in
Right.
style, and it
Right.
may not always work.
Yeah, I had that feeling when I listened to Yeezus that, like,
Jesus, is that what he goes by?
well,
That was the album.
that
Oh,
was-
right.
that like, it's not a great record right now, but in 20 years he's gonna be really glad he made this record.
Yeah. And
I
I
mean,
mean, yeah.
Like,
right.
like as part of his catalog,
Yeah.
like that's
Right.
it's an interesting evolution, and he pushes the boundaries. But you know, I think, you know, Kanye's an artist, Jay-Z's a businessman, right? I mean, that's my
Oh, sure.
perspective.
I mean,
Maybe-
they're
well, he
both
was,
both,
right?
but they
Of course.
they strategize maybe a little bit differently. Like
Yeah.
Yeezus was not a record that was designed to like king the market, sure,
No.
in a way that I think Blueprint
yeah.
3 was much more designed like how can
Yeah.
I hit these key marks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are artists that I feel like I maybe should be listening more because when I hear random songs, I'm like, oh wait, that's actually not bad. Like Jessie J, who I know very little about, but I'm like, there's a few Jessie J songs. Like, I actually am not mad at this. I haven't really bothered to go to listen to her catalog, but maybe who knows? I'll
She's got a
surprise
great
myself.
voice. No, yeah, she's got a really
don't
great
know.
voice.
I
I wish Josh would listen to some pop stuff. I'm like dying. When he went to the Bruno Mars concert maybe it's been a little over a year, I was so excited for him. I was like, welcome. This is awesome.
Yeah.
You're going to go
Yeah,
see
I
Bruno Mars.
hated
He's so
that.
talented because, you know, you're right. It's
I
definitely.
like some Bruno stuff, but at this wedding I was at, I got a request to play Uptown Funk, which I'd never really listened to outside of like 5
it's so
seconds in the
good.
background. That song's hot garbage.
It's terrible.
And this is
loved
nothing
it.
against Bruno, but that's I was listening
It's
to
the
some,
worst.
This is so
Why?
fucking
Why
derivative.
does it work for me?
It's like I don't know.
because you don't know the original songs that they
Oh,
ripped
I
off.
see.
Maybe I don't know, but I just like
Partly.
it's like I can't believe. Well, it's not that I couldn't believe people liked it. Like it made sense to me why this song's a hit, but to me it's like, oh my god, this is just ripping off 4
Yeah.
different songs. I
Right.
like this is such garbage to me. And again, it's
Yeah.
nothing against Bruno because there's other Bruno Mars stuff I like, but like
No, I
Uptown
agree.
Funk just offended me. It's been a while since I've been offended by a song, but that song fucking offended me.
It offended me too, but to some extent, Bruno just offends me. Like, you know, I mean, he's talented. That's not to take that away from him. And I agree with you. There are some things I like, but I also think that he's a knockoff artist. The first
Which
time I
he's
saw
been
him,
accused of that, sure.
well, sure,
Yeah.
right? Like, so there's in Uptown Funk that's obvious.
Yeah.
With Treasure right? There's a whole story about Breakbot. Thank you. There's French House Guy,
I
Right,
love
right,
Breakbot.
whose song he kind of ripped off. Baby, I'm Yours. Is that it?
I mean, isn't music just an evolution? Like it's
And then, but the first
Everyone's
time I
ripping
saw
off
him,
everyone,
before
it
all
seems.
that, well, my wife is a huge Bruno fan, which is how I keep ending up. I've seen him perform 3 times, which is not.
But you're gonna blame it on the wife. Okay, gotcha.
But the first time, you know, I walked away thinking, this guy is like he's a Michael Jackson impersonator who never heard Off the Wall or Thriller.
Or maybe he did. And
Like-
he's just very good at like.
No,
how do
I just meant like his Michael Jackson experience started it bad.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So it missed the
Oh,
best
okay.
parts of Michael
Got
Jackson.
Got it.
And then, but that's how I've just always felt about Bruno. Again, like you said earlier, he doesn't need me to like him. He's
Right,
doing
right.
fine.
I
But-
feel like we take away. I mean,
But
he does it for the show, you know, and like if the show works, I mean,
But you asked something else that I think is interesting, which is, isn't all music derivative
Yeah.
of other music? So
Yes,
let's
I
put
mean,
that to you.
some
Talk
sure,
us through that.
to some extent. I think, but there's a different. There's always this fine line. What pushes music forward, I think, are the kind of incremental changes that nudge it in a different direction, as opposed to sort of really. In the case of something like Uptown Funk, I feel like it's just replicating a bunch of things that we already know, as opposed to, I'm trying to think of an example of something that kind of pushes things in a slightly different direction. Of course, nothing's coming to mind right now.
but could he be bringing it back? Because for you guys, that was maybe the music you were listening to back then. Those were the
That's what covers are for.
But for us, this is something new. I've
Well,
never heard this stuff before. My parents didn't introduce it to me,
But if
so
he
I
had
have
put
an
out a cover-
appreciation.
Of the time that you never heard.
And he performs it amazing. Then,
would-
how is
then you
that
would
not
appreciate
ripping
it
off?
as if it was new. And, you know, to me that would be maybe not interesting, but it'd be less offensive.
I just feel like it's not fair because he's bringing a lot of smile and joy and jumping jacks to a room and he's an entertainer, he's a performer. I mean, that's what he's really good at. So why take that away from him just because?
Well, we're not taking it away from him.
Okay.
He's entitled to that, and he gets all the riches and spoils of that.
You can be an entertainer and being kind of unoriginal.
Yeah.
Those are not mutually
Right.
exclusive categories. You know?
And there's going to be guys like us that don't like it. So,
Fair enough.
but he makes his crowd happy,
Right.
and that's kind of what we were talking about earlier, right?
Right.
Like the crowd loves it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's to some extent that's all that matters. Now we're just not part of that crowd.
Right.
I would also say that that what's that Nas phrase, right? No idea is original, right? And if the history of pop music is a history of repetition and of redundancies and of copying in different ways, but yet we know because we can listen to it that pop music also evolves over time. So clearly there's some introduction of novelty that's happening with it. And I think, partly what we like about music is the idea, whether it's true or not, and you could have a musicologist sit down and break down, no, actually it sounds exactly like this other thing.
Right.
But as long as we feel like we're getting something different, right?
Yeah.
This is what the German philosopher Adorno talks about as kind of pseudo-individualization, that part of the trick that pop culture plays on us is it leads us to believe, and I kind of agree with him and I half disagree with him on Adorno on this, but it's this idea that what music does is pop music gives us the idea that we are making choices about what we want to listen to and that we can choose the songs that are important to us, even though those choices are always constrained by the market. So it's not like it's not like we're actually getting real choice. It's like, here's the 10 songs that you can pick from, pick one that you really like, right? But that said, I think so long as we feel like none of us probably would like a song that we thought was just a copy of something else. If you thought Uptown Funk sounded exactly like a Justin Timberlake song, you probably wouldn't like Uptown Funk. On some level, you think that you're getting something that you haven't heard before that's
Right.
enjoyable. And as long as you think that, and we all fall for that illusion, even if, again, on a technical level, someone could say, well, it's actually really similar to this other thing.
Right.
As long as we believe it's original, that's what makes it original.
Right.
The perception is greater than the reality in that respect.
That's right.
If I could just come back to like things that I feel like I should be listening to more. I mean, I feel like I really should be listening to more dance music. I never got into house. I never got into techno because I identified as being a hip hop guy, and being a hip hop guy, I mean, you weren't fucking with house and techno music. But I feel like I probably really cheated myself off of some really interesting musical experiences by not going more to like raves and to dances. You know, the fact that my kids are really into EDM, and by my kids I mean my students, you know, it makes me curious to see what is that experience like? What is that music like? Because I don't presume that I would dislike it. You know, I love music that's designed to make people dance. It's a big reason why I love Latin music. Latin music is highly dependent on a lot of repetition and using like the same kind of piano riffs that like everyone else uses or whatnot. You know, but the goal is, how do you get people moving? And for that reason, if I have an appreciation for something like Latin boogaloo music, which I love, which is kind of a highly redundant derivative style, I should also be open to something like, you know, I know EDM is a very poor term, but it's the one I understand. Like, I should be open to listening to that and understanding this is what people like about it, even if I don't necessarily like it. I should at least expose myself to it. So I don't know. One of these days, maybe when I take my daughter to, oh my God, to like EDC or something, I'll learn about it and be I'm never going to this again.
Yeah, exactly.
But we'll see. We'll see. That's
Cool.
not going to be right around the corner though.
That's right. Well, on that note, we got to shut it down.
All right.
Thanks for being here, man. I
No, it's
appreciate
a
you.
huge pleasure. It was really fun talking to both of you.
Absolutely. Hey, that was Oliver Wang. Was it any good? I hope I have met your low expectations. If you didn't like the show, it probably means your expectations were too high. So when you come back next week, just don't expect so much. I mean, you know, it's all good. We're just going to do whatever we do.